Welcome to Divorce Explained, hosted by myself, Leanne Townsend, and my colleague and co-host, Steve Benmor. We are both divorce lawyers here in Ontario, Canada. And today we have a topic that everywhere you look right now, people are talking about it. It's about the Coldplay concert and the affair caught on the jumbotron that went viral. And it's gone international, and so our title of our episode today is Coldplay and Cold Truths When Cheating Hits Center Stage. And Steve and I are taking a bit of a different approach to this. As family lawyers here in Toronto, Canada, we want to look at how this sort of situation would affect a family here in Ontario. So if this had happened, at the Rogers Centre in Toronto on the jumbotron there, and CEO Andy Byron lived in Toronto, and he or his partner came to Steve or I, what would we be saying to him or to his wife, and what are the family law implications? So I'll turn it over to you, Steve, to get us started.
Well, this is a very interesting case from a sensationalism standpoint. It certainly makes for fantastic entertainment. But let's step away from the circus-like experience of this, and let's look at this through the lens of Andy, Kristen, and Megan. So for those that don't know, Andy Byron is not just a guy on the jumbotron. He's a husband and a father. And the mother of his children is Megan Kerrigan Byron. And they were happily married, or so they thought. And so Andy is a very bright guy, highly educated, graduated university, has been involved in a number of different IT ventures, most recently a very large company named Astronomer, which is a pioneer in data operations. And as we probably can imagine, in the era of AI and the explosion of AI, Astronomer and Andy and his team are very busy. And last I checked, they raised another Series D venture capital of about $100 million to develop their platform, one of which is called Astro. So things were going really well for Megan and Andy until that dreaded day when Andy and his chief of human resources, Kristen Cabot, were caught on the jumbotron. So what would that mean for a Ontario Andy and an Ontario Megan and an Ontario Andy and Megan's children? So let's start with the obvious. Infidelity. What is the role of infidelity in this sudden divorce? Answer, almost zero. Under Canadian law, Megan can use the adultery as the basis for seeking a divorce. She could also use physical separation of a period of a year or more. And she may do either in Massachusetts. In Ontario, however, the adultery would really only be a trigger to allow Megan to seek a divorce. And in Canada, Andy could not use his own adultery to seek a divorce. So then the subject of infidelity, some might think, will spill over into other areas. Well, should he have custody or primary parenting of the children? In Ontario, infidelity is not used as a criticism of a parent. In fact, if you think about it, if adultery were to somehow place a parent in a lower position, there would be a lot of parents who would be in a lower position. Adultery is pervasive, and Ontario law and Canadian law does not treat adultery as a basis for lowering a person's role in their children's lives. And then the next one is when Megan, and the rest of the world, of course, saw the jumbotron. One could think that's the moment when Megan said, I'm breaking up with Andy. In Ontario, we call that the date of separation. And therefore, that would be the day from which all of Andy and Megan's assets and debts would be valued. for the purposes of division. Not the day before, not the day after, that day, which is quite interesting because if you think about it, Andy, who is one of the founders of Astronomer, and of course held a sizable sum of shares in Astronomer, and I'm going to venture to guess, like most venture capitalists, when they start a new company, they put some of the shares in family members' names, like their siblings, their wife, Megan, possibly their adult children, maybe a family trust. So both Andy and Megan's valuation in those shares might have been significantly affected. And if anybody goes onto the net and reads the board of directors pronouncement about what's going on with their company as a result, of course, of the jumbotron event, they would see that the board of directors asked Andy, who, by the way, was one of the founders of the company and the CEO, to step down. So the next morning, Andy Byron tendered his resignation. He's no longer employed by Astronomer. So that might affect Megan's rights to child support and spousal support because his income has now gone down. So I can go on and on and on, but this case has some significant consequences for the children and the spouse of the person, in this case, Andy Byron, who got caught in a 5-second snippet in front of 65,000 people at Gillette Stadium.
Yeah, this case, I don't think we've seen something like it, at least recently. And I think it's important to remember, as you kind of touched upon there, Steve, that we're dealing with real people here. These are real lives. They're not celebrities who signed up to be in the spotlight. These are, private individuals who, showed a lapse in judgment, that's for sure, by attending this concert. And the legal implications of an affair, normally might not be as widespread or might not be as impactful because, as Steve mentioned, you can get a divorce on the grounds of adultery. But most people here in Ontario do it on the grounds of living separate and apart for 1 year. It's considered no-fault divorce. Proving bad behavior isn't something that happens in most divorces nowadays. This fault and bad behavior element has been removed. But in this particular case, because of it going viral and because of Andy Byron resigning from his position because of what happened, it does affect his income and potentially it affects his future earning opportunities. So, sometimes when someone is out of work, they get laid off or they forced to resign. Like in this situation, it might be argued by Megan's lawyer that, well, he was earning a high income, he's capable of earning a high income. So if he doesn't find a position within a reasonable period of time, he should be imputed an income. And that income that he's imputed should be based on the income that he was earning while he was a CEO at Astronomer. And that's a high income, and that's what we should be using for spousal support and child support. But in this case, because of the public humiliation, I guess, essentially, that as a result of this video going viral, Andy might find it harder to find another job. He other companies may not want to hire someone who is, right now associated with extramarital affairs and bad judgment and all of this sort of thing. And so his employability, at least for the short term, may have been significantly affected. And so his lawyer can quite reasonably argue that his income earning for this foreseeable future has been damaged. And therefore, that needs to be factored in, and he shouldn't be imputed an income. His actual income should be used. And that's an area where I think the lawyers will have a lot of debate.
And I'll tell you, when you talk about lawyers debating, whether you like it or not, the rule of law and the laws that govern the state of Massachusetts, the country of USA or Canada or Ontario, those rules are made up of words, and those words have definitions. So I'd like to just take a pause and define infidelity or adultery. Right now, Andy Byron, throughout the world, is being accused of adultery. But do we know that he had sexual relations with Kristen Cabot? We know they went to a concert together. We know that they were romantically embraced. But do we know that he and her committed adultery, or did they have sexual relations? And so in most jurisdictions, including Ontario, adultery requires sexual relations. Embracing, hugging, kissing, holding hands is not adultery and not infidelity. And so in Ontario, Megan would have a hard time convincing a judge that Andy kissing a woman at a Coldplay concert fits within the parameters of adultery. She would much sooner want to leave him for the moral breach, but using the legal test of 1 year separation to establish her right to a divorce. Another point, and I'm not sure if this occurs in Massachusetts, but in Ontario, we've had lots of cases where people lost their job and went to jail for the very event that triggered their divorce. So, for example, domestic violence. A man that makes $200,000 a year assaults his wife, pleads guilty or is found guilty, goes to jail. Does the wife not get child and spousal support on $200,000 a year? So judges have consistently ruled that somebody cannot benefit from their own misconduct. And in a situation like that, a judge would impute income to what the person earned before they split up. And then that money would likely be paid from the leftover assets belonging to the offender. In other words, the property division, which would likely result in X going to one spouse and Y going to the other. Well, the Y that goes to the husband might be used to satisfy the support obligations that he may have had he not gone to jail, which stemmed from his assault, which resulted in his loss of employment. So it may be that Megan and her lawyers can convince the judge that Andy's pre-existing income should be used to establish the amount of support that he owes her. As for where the money comes from, it may come from other assets, which they may or may not have. I don't know. Now, having said that, what is interesting is that Megan may not want to see the inside of a courtroom in her life. She has suffered tremendous public shame and embarrassment. Is she really going to ask a judge to make a ruling? Because for that to happen, she's got to take her case to court, which takes me to the likely outcome in a case like this. We're never going to hear from Megan and Andy again. They had their 30 seconds of fame or embarrassment, and they are going to settle their case behind closed doors, most likely in mediation or mediation arbitration.
And I would agree with that. This type of situation involving a high level executive and his family, this is commonly the type of situation we see that goes to mediation or mediation and arbitration. Lots of families who are in that situation choose to settle their family law disputes privately. They don't want everything in a court record. They don't want their neighbors to be able to go down to the courthouse and read all about what happened. And in this case, it could be more than neighbors who are, poking their nose into it because of what happened with the viral video. So a private settlement, I think, would be appealing to both parties. And
on top of all that, remember that there are a lot of stakeholders involved in Andy and Megan's financial affairs. So We're talking about a venture capital firm that is heavily invested with seed investors in the hundreds of millions of dollars. There's shareholder agreements that involve Andy and his other co-founders and his equity stakeholders and investors. If this case were to be in Ontario, and if Megan took her case to the courts, then Andy's financial affairs, his shareholder agreements, the valuation of his shares, financial statements of the corporation would all be public record. And unless Andy and his lawyers could convince a judge that the court file should be sealed, which is extremely unlikely, then all of this information would be public record, and there would be some significant damage done to the shareholders, the board of directors, quite frankly, even Megan, because Megan does not want to kill the goose that lays the golden egg by having the company devalued and competitors swooping in and reading her divorce file, and so therefore taking advantage of the disclosure of all of the details regarding Astronomer and Astro. So this is a classic case that's not going to make it into the family courts, and it certainly would not have made it into the family courts here.
Although arguably, one thing that could happen is we know as divorce lawyers that sometimes our clients, particularly those who've been wronged by an extramarital affair, by something as humiliating as what Megan has had to go through here, they get very emotional. And she, is probably going through anger, grief, sadness, a whole wide range of emotions. And those emotions sometimes or often will affect the decisions that a client wants to make in their family law matter. And, their lawyer will try to persuade them to be making decisions from a place of logic and reasonableness and not letting their emotions dictate what they're doing. But often clients want to do that. And so if for some reason, not for some reason, it's understandable Megan's going to be feeling angry and grief and whatnot. And if she wants to, really take Andy to the cleaners, as the term goes, and embarrass him further, and she decides she wants to go to court, then, that could be a possibility. And one thing that is a bit, it's not completely unique, but it is unusual to this case because of the way it went viral with the cheating or the potential cheating, is that, could Megan make some sort of a claim from a civil law standpoint that she suffered emotional damage or trauma? We're seeing it more in the domestic violence realm where people are making claims for damages for domestic violence or family violence. And right now, as we know, there's a case waiting for a decision from the Supreme Court of Canada called Aliwala, where the court is deciding whether there should be a new tort for family violence or whether we should just be fitting it in with the existing tort system. But emotional trauma and emotional, certainly I think a lot of people, I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not going to diagnose emotional trauma, but it would be quite reasonable that in this situation, Megan has gone through that and the humiliation of it all. A lawyer could persuade her that she could sue him for emotional trauma and sue for damages and potentially get a lot of extra money that way.
I want to jump in on those words. A lawyer can persuade. That's what you just said, Leanne.
Yeah.
A lawyer can persuade. Few things. Number one, that's the job of a lawyer. A lawyer is an advocate. A lawyer is somebody that constructs arguments. A lawyer is someone that uses those arguments to persuade a person in a position of authority, sometimes a judge, sometimes an arbitrator. But I want to pick up on those words, a lawyer can persuade, because poor Megan and poor Megan's children right now, they are a global embarrassment They suffered global embarrassment, I should say. They didn't do anything wrong. But they are now the victims of widespread shame. And almost every divorce that I've done in the last 30 plus years involves some level of guilt, shame, regret. And those feelings sometimes can be preyed upon by others. And fortunately in Ontario, we have a lot of very, very good lawyers, ethical, sound, moral, and all over the world. But I have to admit, there are lawyers that would look at Megan's case and say, hey, I want to get my claws into that case. I want to be on CNN. I want to sue Andy Byron, and I want to be splashed all over the news every couple days for the next few years, whereby the subject of Andy's misconduct is my ticket to revenues and my ticket to fame. And on a much smaller level, this happens in Ontario, in Toronto, in downtown Toronto, all the time. People like Megan, for whatever their emotional trauma situation was, in this case, the discovery of adultery, but it could be something else. They go into a lawyer's office, and then the lawyer says to themselves, this client is very upset, and this could be a very good file. There could be a lot of revenue from working this file. Some would say milking this file. And the role of the lawyer, back to your words, Leanne, persuasion. A good lawyer for Megan right now would persuade her to take a couple weeks off, maybe go travel with the kids, remove themselves from all social media and news, and get a little bit of therapy and support, comfort and love from the family. Block out all of the sources of commentary that might traumatize the children. God bless these children. I certainly hope they're not going to school on Monday morning.
Yeah.
And so nothing beats, oh, by the way, that school's out. It's the summertime, or camp. But nothing beats a good lawyer approaching this case with the highest level of ethics and morality, and ensuring that Megan's overall interests, not just her financial interests, her overall psychosocial, legal, personal, religious, moral, and financial interests were protected. And that lawyer would say, Megan, we'll pick up in a month. Let the media frenzy end. Andy's got to find his feet. And then we will resume the conversation. And guess what, Megan? As bad as what happened was, your children only have one father, and they will forever have this one father. And we're going to have to work something out, and we should do it with the least amount of publicity, the least amount of conflict, and the least amount of cost. Mm-hmm. And that requires a lawyer to forego the possible financial interest in persuading Megan to go another way.
Absolutely. And that's why, it's crucial right now that when Megan is ultimately assembling her, what we'll call divorce team, which is going to include a lawyer likely, it's important for her to get the right people in place, because I have no doubt that there are divorce lawyers out there who have been contacting her and pitching all sorts of things to her that may or may not ultimately be right for her and her family in this situation. And so it's so important that the advisors she turns to are ones who are putting her best interests and her children's best interests first, and not wanting to use this as an opportunity to get fame for themselves. And that's why for her to take some time, there doesn't have to be urgency to this. I mean, she may feel that she wants to do something urgently, but there really isn't. No one's in danger as far as I'm aware. We're not aware of anybody dissipating assets and things like that. I mean, there could be things going on behind the scenes that we don't know about, of course, but on its face, that there's no absolute urgency to this. So hitting pause, taking some time for herself, taking some time for her children, before making any major decisions and before really even lawyering up would probably be a really good course of action for her right now in this situation.
Absolutely. Our care, our concern, and our hearts go out to the children of the Byron family. The children are always the angels and sometimes the victims in divorce. And I pray and hope for the children of the Byron family and possibly the children of the Cabot family, that they are shielded and in no way affected on a long-term basis by the events of recent days. The fact of the matter is, these children have two parents that brought them into this world. They love them dearly. And parents, like all humans, make mistakes. And it's likely that Andy Byron made a mistake. And it may be only one mistake. And it doesn't necessarily define all of who Andy Byron is. And it certainly doesn't define who he is as a father. So I pray and I hope for peace and redemption and resumption of a normal life for the entire Byron and Cabot family.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you, everybody, for this episode of Divorce Explained. It was, as usual, a pleasure speaking with you, Leanne, and discussing a recent event and making it into an educational tool for our followers. So be well, everybody. Thank you.